We've got a lot to talk about today, but I want to mention this. This appears to be a big hint at what AFMF3 actually is, and it's not what I expected. It's a way for it to actually get game data, even though it's driver level frame generation, which is super interesting. I spotted this over on Ancient Gameplays, and I will link that full video in the description, and it'll go into way more detail on all of this, but I want to bring this to your attention if you're not already following that channel. And this actually comes from a different topic, which is AFMF 2.1, which is available in a certain preview driver and brings its own update, which is not AFMF 3, but is also still a good update for AFMF. We have lots of other topics to talk about today, and as always, I'll try to timestamp things in the video description unless my kids get home and interrupt me before I get the timestamps done, in which case, when do you guys do it? Anyway, why is it always my job to timestamp things? I guess it is my YouTube channel, but anyway, whatever. So let's dig into this AFMF stuff, though, because I think this is pretty interesting. So first of all, AFMF 2.1 is now available if you're using the preview driver 25.120.01.14, which was originally touted as the driver to use to get PyTorch on Windows for Radeon cards. But if you use that driver, it looks like AFMF 2.1 is available with a update to fast motion response. And what this does is, so basically AFMF, I guess I should give the basics here real quick for those who aren't aware. Maybe you don't have an AMD card or anything. This is AMD's driver level frame generation. So it's generally not as good as an in-game frame generation implementation, because in a game integrated frame generation, FSR frame generation, you have access to game information, game data, etc. So while AMD was the first to get a driver level version, it had some downsides, one of which is that in fast motion, because frame generation is just frame interpolation. You have two frames that the game has generated, and it's using those as information to guess what happened in between. It slightly delays showing you the latest actual frame in order to show you the interpolated frame first, and then it also can have some image quality artifacts in it. Now, the wider the difference is between the two frames, which often happens on fast motion, so you're swinging your camera around wildly, there can be a big gap between the two frames that you're interpolating from. So in the past, AMD's AFMF has just decided to give up and just not interpolate frames that it thought was too different in fast motion, because they didn't want to give you a lot of image artifacts in it because it would look bad. However, what that does is it decreases the motion fluidity that you're getting from fluid motion frames, because it gives up on interpolating that frame, so you momentarily have a lower frame rate. What this is letting you do is essentially choose which behavior you would prefer. Do you want it to repeat the frame when it detects too much motion, or do you want it to give you the blended frame anyway, even though it might have more image quality artifacts? And this is how I think it should have been from the start, is letting you make that decision. Because I've noticed that a lot of people, like a lot of people really like lossless scaling, for example, even though it definitely gives you image quality artifacts, which to me, I find pretty distracting. Same thing with AFMF. I don't use it myself because I find the image quality artifacts distracting. But I know a lot of people absolutely love this, in which case they'll probably rather have the blended frame for the motion fluidity and just accept the artifacting that you get, and away you go. This gives you that choice, which I think is just a good thing to give people. But this is where Ancient Gameplays has taken it further, which I find really interesting. So if you use this driver, so as I understand it in the video, and again, I'll link the video so you can get all the details on how to do this from this video directly. But as I understand it, he used this driver, but then also used, I think it's AMD Profile Inspector, which is a third-party tool that I haven't tried out myself. But it seems like using those two things was able to trick it into thinking AFMF 3 was like a thing. Now, to be clear, it was not able to actually use AFMF 3. I had talked about the leaked code for AFMF3 in a previous news video, but was able to kick it on. Now, by kick it on, I mean have it show up in the user interface. So it's not actually activated, but the text that tells you what it's doing actually gives a ton of information about what AFMF3 is going to be. And what it clearly seems to be is a way for it to gather game data. Remember, the downside to driver level frame gen compared to in-game frame generation is the in-game version has things like motion vectors. It doesn't have to interpret what they are just based on the 2 frames. It also has motion vectors, might even be aware of what's like a HUD element versus what isn't if the game can feed that information into the algorithm. Anyway, so check this out. This says that there's now going to be a AFMF standard mode, but also an enhanced mode. And by reading the tooltip, it basically says AMD Fluid Motion Frames has failed to detect applicable in-game information and has switched to AFMF standard mode. So please attempt enabling in-game settings such as motion blur or AMD Fidelity FX Super Resolution, so FSR, upscale to resolve this issue. So by interpreting this text, what you can essentially see is that the enhanced version of AFMF, what we're thinking will be called AFMF3 based on the, at least in the driver code, maybe it'll actually just be called AFMF enhanced version, but the driver code we've looked at called it AFMF3, is essentially saying that if you're using a game that has something like motion blur, or I would guess especially FSR upscaling turned on, the driver is probably then going to be able to access game data like motion vectors, and intercepting that information, then be able to enhance its driver level frame generation, which I think is really cool. So again, to be 100% clear, you can't actually use the enhanced mode right now. It doesn't work. That'll be coming in a future driver update. But by using this text, we can infer that that's what it's going to be doing. So AFMF will be able to become a much higher quality driver level frame generation by accessing in-game data, by intercepting the information coming out of things like FSR Super Resolution within the game. And I think that's really cool. I'm hoping that this doesn't trigger any kind of issues like we saw when they tried to do a driver level reflex alternative with Anti-Lag Plus, where intercepting what the game was doing at the driver level ended up flagging some anti-cheat software. So I'm hoping they've learned their lesson from that and they're not going to do anything too aggressive here. But if this just works, I think that is really cool. And again, check out the Ancient Gameplays video for additional information on this, and that will be linked in the video description. Now, Xbox has been in the news. Microsoft in general, Gamepass is their future Xbox hardware. So we need to talk about some of this because there's a ton going on. So first of all, Microsoft is now assuring gamers that there will be future Xbox hardware. Now, why are they having to assure people of that? Well, there's first of all just been a lot of speculation that Microsoft is just going to go entirely as a third-party game publisher, along with offering a cloud streaming service and just no longer do hardware. Now, there had even been some pretty big leaks getting big articles similar to this, which have now been updated with Microsoft's response, just saying like Xbox might be going full third party and leaving hardware for good, citing a bunch of sources who generally have good track records on Xbox leaks. Now, Microsoft has now responded to that. And honestly, though, the way they phrase it still could be interpreted as a little less than what it might be trying to imply. But anyway, so apparently the direct update to articles talking about canceling future Xbox hardware is, we are actively investing in our future first-party consoles and devices designed, engineered, and built by Xbox. For more details, the community can revisit our agreement announcement with AMD. Now, that agreement announcement was when Microsoft and AMD officially entered a new multi-year partnership for first-party Xbox hardware. And there's a bunch of information on that. I've talked about this in previous videos, so we don't need to rehash the whole thing. But basically, they're saying that there will be official Xbox hardware, which is not just, I think, something like an ROG Ally X, which is Xbox branded, but wasn't fully, designed, engineered, and built by Xbox. Like, that's really kind of an Asus product with an Xbox branding and some cooperation on that. Like, Xbox is clearly working on that. But anyway, this sounds like they are talking about actual first-party consoles. But I'm telling you, there's still tons more rumors and leaks talking about things being canceled. We have Kepler L2, who has got a lot of AMD rumors correct. And, AMD does work with the console makers, specifically saying that Xbox handheld will be canceled. Now, to be clear, the Xbox handheld is different than the ROG Ally X handheld gaming PC, which is Xbox branded. But there was rumors that there would be an actual Xbox console that would be a handheld. And it's looking like, at least according to Kepler L2, that seems to have been canceled. But apparently, Microsoft is doubling down that there is going to be some sort of next generation Xbox. That is some sort of console. Again, though, I mean, it really feels like they want to move in the direction of being a cloud streaming Gamepass service that is a third-party publisher and then also has Xbox-branded PCs. So I'm still in the camp where I feel like that's the long-term future of Xbox, but perhaps we will still get at least one more generation of Xbox console that is not just a PC. That being said, I still think you could read this quote as still just being an Xbox PC, but one that is designed, engineered, and built by Xbox. So I'm still in the camp that this could very much be an Xbox PC, and that's where they're going, and we may not get an actual traditional console that is fully distinct from a PC, despite the fact that they're saying first-party consoles and devices. I think that they could just be obfuscating what the meaning of the word console is. So I'm still not sure that this fully puts to bed the idea that the next Xbox will just be an Xbox PC. We'll have to see, though. I'm very interested in it. I'm still leaning toward that being the case. Now, there have been a ton of discussion also around Xbox Game Pass, as well as the PC version of Game Pass. Just as kind of a side note, like my first video that was actually pretty successful on this channel back in October of 2020, it was in my first 2 weeks of trying to do like a daily like tech news related video, was actually about my thoughts on PC Game Pass. And at the time, I talked about what a great deal it was, but I kind of thought that it felt like the subscription thing where they're taking a loss to try to get people into the service and then would eventually jack up prices. But at the time, back in 2020, seemed like a crazy good deal. And in the meantime, they have been bumping up prices. And just recently, I'm sure you've already seen all about it, they massively bumped up prices. The Game Pass PC price went up a good chunk. I think it was like 30 or 40%, something like that. But then the Ultimate Game Pass version went all the way up to $30 a month, which the whole idea of why Game Pass is interesting is if you're somebody who plays enough games, then the cost of Game Pass could actually be an efficient way to get you access to a ton of games back when it was like $10 a month or less. But once it goes up to 15 and then it goes up down all the way to 30, that's a lot more of an ask because those day one access to games and things like that at $30 a month, if you still pretend games cost $60, which I know a lot of them are closer to 70, 80 now, but for some mental math, if we think about games as being like $60, this is essentially the cost of buying a brand new AAA game every 2 months. So at that point, it stops being as interesting as like, I get to try a bunch of games for a reasonable price and maybe actually power through a bunch of them. Now that's the most expensive tier, but I think it's absolutely no surprise that shortly after this happened, there were tons of unsubscribing happening, specifically enough that the page to cancel subscriptions was actually overwhelmed with traffic. I'm not on the camp. Some people were thinking that this was maybe intentional. Did they DDoS their own cancel page so that people would be unable to cancel and then forget to go back and actually cancel? I don't think that that's what happened. I think it was probably just legitimately this reminded a bunch of people to cancel. I personally canceled my Game Pass subscription, just so you know. It's too expensive now. I don't use it enough. It just doesn't make sense to me anymore. Maybe I'll revisit that in the future. And yeah, they did improve some things like 1440p streaming access now in the cloud streaming and things like that, along with the price increase. But to me, it's a bridge too far. Now, there have been rumors that they'll prepare a free version of cloud gaming that's ad supported. Now that's at least interesting to me, depending on how the ads work. If it's just like when you begin the stream, you have to watch some ads and that it's not actually going to interrupt gameplay where hopefully if they did it that way, it would at least pause the game. But some games don't pause. Like imagine playing Elden Ring on streaming and there's no pause in that game. If it just launches you into a full screen ad for 60 seconds in the middle of a boss fight, imagine the fun of that. So I'm hoping that if they do go with an ad-supported tier for the streaming service, that it's just you watch some ads to start the stream and that it's not interrupting actual gameplay with ad breaks. That would be pretty disruptive. But if it did get you a free version of the cloud streaming, I think that could at least potentially be kind of cool if you want a budget way to try out some games or stream games if you happen to be away from your PC or Xbox or whatever. So that's kind of cool. Now, another thing I want to touch on in today's news video is the updates to the anti-cheat for Call of Duty. So as I reported in my video a couple of days ago testing out Black Ops 7 beta, they have updated it to require TPM 2.0, which previous Call of Duties did not. Now, games like Battlefield 6 do require that, TPM 2.0 and Secure Boot, and some other games do as well. So this seems to be the way anti-cheats are going these days, but I instantly saw on my video a bunch of comments that there's still cheaters in the game. And there are definitely videos posted online of cheaters in Black Ops 7, so then that raises the question, has this actually been effective? Now, Call of Duty has posted their own post claiming it is effective and extremely effective. Again, they are hardly an unbiased source, but at the same time, they're actually the only people who would have any meaningful volume of data to go off of. So there's that. So here's what they have to say. So they say that 97% of cheaters were stopped within 30 minutes of their first sign-in. So they're saying that the videos of cheaters that you've seen were caught. Those people were caught, and 97% of them were caught within the first 30 minutes. So some cheaters got into games, but were shut down pretty quickly. And they're also saying that fewer than 1% of cheating attempts even reached a match, and saying that those who did were usually removed within minutes. Again, this is their data from the first party who would obviously have an incentive to claim that their system is effective, so interpret that as you will, but they're also the only ones, like I said, with any meaningful access to a high sample size of data here. That being said, I do have a question about how they could be sure about this, because if a cheat went undetected, how are you factoring that into your data? That's an honest question. So if you're saying that 97% of cheaters were stopped within 30 minutes, how are you factoring in cheaters who were never stopped because you didn't detect them? Are you just assuming they were all detected when you're gathering this data and publishing it? So are we saying that 97% of cheaters who were stopped within 30 minutes? Were there cheaters who were never detected that isn't making it into this data set? So I'm just going to throw that out there. That being said, there is reason to believe that this is a more effective measure for cheating effect, the cheating rates, and it seems like it's probably more effective than what they were doing previously. So that's at least a positive. Now, they're also claiming that another data point for this being effective is that they're at least claiming, I don't go to cheat websites to monitor whether this is true, but they're claiming that major cheat providers are now labeling their tools as unusable or detected, and that resellers are acknowledging they have no reliable products to offer for Black Ops 7. So that's interesting. And they're also saying that we're not only disabling their cheats, but also their illegal businesses as well. We have now directly contributed to the closure of over 40 cheat developers and resellers since Black Ops 6 launched. Anyway, so the point is that they are acknowledging that requiring TPM 2.0 and Secure Boot can be disruptive. And, some people, depending on your PC, you may be unable to do that, and that certainly has downsides. They are at least claiming that it's been worth it for the effectiveness of the anti-cheat. So anyway, I don't have a hard stance on this stuff personally. I'm just reporting the information. I think that it's annoying to have any game require something like TPM 2.0 and Secure Boot, or any kind of, like kernel level anti-cheat. That feels really invasive. At the same time, as somebody who at least used to be pretty into competitive gaming, I don't have time to be super competitive these days, but in my youth, I was very into competitive gaming, and losing a match to cheaters and ranking down is incredibly frustrating and can just absolutely destroy a game. So I do want there to be effective anti-cheat, and if this is the only way to do it, then hopefully if they are being this invasive, it at least is effective. So I'm hoping that they're correct, that it at least is effective if they are being invasive. It would be really nice if there was a non-invasive but also extremely effective method. But it seems like a lot of games have been struggling to find something like that. So we are where we are. What would be nice is if people just didn't cheat in games. Like, I really don't understand it. Like, to me, the entire fun in a competitive game is the getting better and getting like a measurable skill increase. And it's measuring your skill increase. That's what I find enjoyable in like ladders and ranking systems. And so it doesn't make sense to me what the joy of cheating on that is, because that just means a number went up that you didn't earn. So who cares? Like, it seems like a complete waste of time. But clearly a lot of people do cheat. So there's some mental situation where it makes sense to some people, apparently. Anyway, in completely other news, AMD and OpenAI have announced a absolutely massive GPU deal. Now, this is server GPUs, and my channel is more about PC gaming, but I still think that this is relevant in the fact that you kind of want, we want there to be competition with NVIDIA. We do not want a monopoly, even if you prefer NVIDIA products. It's not good for anyone to just have a complete monopoly. And based on market share data, NVIDIA is pretty dang close to a monopoly in all realistic sense of the word in the GPU market. Now, so AMD clawing as much of that market share as they can only be a good thing. And even if it's in the server space, that still, I think, helps there continue to be an AMD to compete with NVIDIA in the gaming space. So I'm all for AMD getting some big business deals in the server space if that means it helps AMD make money, which helps them have R&D, which helps them continue their business. Anyway. Now, I'm not saying that AMD is by any means looking like they're going out of business. They're clearly profitable and all of that. I'm just saying NVIDIA is a much bigger business. Anyway, so it's very much a good thing, I think, to see things like this. Now, it's also interesting to see it phrased in terms of electricity. It's a 6 gigawatt GPU deal starting with MI 450 rollout in 2026. So that's pretty interesting. So 6 gigawatts of AI infrastructure, initial 1 gigawatt deployment of AMD Instinct MI450 series GPU capacity beginning in the second half of, I think it was 2026. Anyway, I'm not going to go into all of these details because, like I said, this is more on the server side of things. I'll link my sources in the video description. But just to be clear, this could be a very significant amount of money. This is many, many, many billions of dollars. So That's it's second half of 2026 probably for when the first gigawatt will be deployed. And also, this is clearly showing a big like investors are liking this. AMD's stock rose 25% in pre-market trading after this announcement. Anyway, now 1 gigawatt of AI capacity online costs about $50 billion. So these are huge investments that we're talking about here. So anyway, that's good stuff for the future of AMD's revenue and all of that. So good. Now, in other news, regarding Intel, who has been having their struggles of late, including a bunch of layoffs and a lot of divisions being shut down, we're seeing that Debian and Ubuntu are starting to see some negative fall-offs from that. So many Debian and Ubuntu Linux packages for Intel accelerators and other Intel software have now been orphaned, meaning, so I'm by no means a Linux expert, but my understanding is that different entities and individuals work on updates to the kernel, which then get adopted into various Linux distributions like Debian and Ubuntu. Anyway, but Intel themselves, or people within Intel, were responsible for updating a bunch of those packages, which are now not being updated because Intel's laid off those people, and nobody is, at least up to this point, taking up the slack to get that done. So this Phoronix article then lists what some of these are that are now orphaned, but that kind of sucks. So just showing that there's definitely some fallout from the loss of a bunch of Intel employees, which is a bad thing for all involved. Anyway, I really hope Intel starts to be competitive again and starts to thrive and can rehire some people. Anyway. In other news on things being canceled, there was a lot of discussion about Bungie's marathon. However, it looks like it is not dead, and there's an NDA'd closed technical test signups that are now open. So if you've been following Bungie's marathon, it seems like there's still things moving forward. Now, in other just random kind of game-related updates, a while back, War Thunder was updated with path tracing, and according to this Q&A they've done with WCCF Tech here, again, sources will be linked in the video description, they are working on an FSR4 update to come soon. So if you were waiting for FSR4 in War Thunder, especially now that there's a path tracing mode, that is apparently on their radar and coming soon, along with opacity micromaps and shader execution reordering, which should improve the performance of the path tracing mode. So that's good to see. Also, this being the beginning of a new month, we now have more Steam hardware survey data. And the September data is showing that 8GB GPUs and 6-core CPUs are in decline, which is interesting. So you can kind of look at, what's gained the most and what's decreased the most. That being said, 512 megabyte VRAM GPUs have seen an increase. So there's that. Anyway. So we're definitely seeing an increase in 16 gigabyte GPUs, going up not quite 1%, but still kind of noticeable. Because remember, the Steam hardware survey is talking about not about what sold this month. It's talking about, they take a random sampling of Steam hardware users to get a sampling of what hardware is in Steam users' PCs. Most of them will not have bought a new GPU this month, right? So you don't expect massive percentage changes in that short of a time frame. Anyway, you can also again see that 8-core CPUs are on the rise, gaining almost 1%, and 6-core CPUs lost a full percent. So that's kind of some big changes there. Anyway, we can always talk more about the Steam hardware survey, but I don't want to get too bogged down in that since we're almost on 30 minutes here. But I do want to share this with you, and it's more to share the source in the video description so that you can follow up on this. This is from PC Games Hardware. Now, they're a German language site, but you can have your web browser translate to English, or you can just look at the graphs, because what they have done is insane. They have benchmarked 180 graphics cards in several games, none of them super new because they're testing super old graphics cards. So like the most demanding game they're testing here is The Witcher 3. Okay. So they can't test the newest games in GPUs that just won't even be able to support the new game. So they've also done a bunch of synthetic benchmarking. And so now you have 180 GPUs actually directly comparable with fresh testing. Because really, to go this far back in GPUs, you usually have to use things like Tech PowerUp's relative performance chart, which isn't usually fresh benchmark data on the oldest cards. It's using, I actually don't know their exact methodology, but they're finding some way to infer how the older ones would compare to the newer ones and to get you a percentage scaling. That's why I always say that this is like a ballpark figure to give you a rough idea how older cards that haven't been benchmarked recently compare to newer ones. But it's not a great way to get like super accurate information on, especially the older the GPU is. But check this out. They're going all the way back to cards like the Radeon HD 5450, the GeForce GT 430, Radeon HD 5670. We got some old stuff back here. GTX 550 Ti. All sorts of really ancient hardware here. And you can mouse over any of these and set it to a 100% baseline and see how other stuff compares. So like if we set, let me actually refresh this because apparently I've been mousing over this so much, it keeps adding in additional percentage scaling. So it looks like our poor 5450 didn't quite get Witcher 3 going, but the Radeon HD 5570 did manage to get 2 frames per second. So if you set this as a 100% baseline, you could then like scale up and notice things like how much more powerful is like a RTX 5090 compared to that, and just get other interesting scaling numbers and everything. So anyway, I think this is pretty cool. Just to kind of play with and kind of look at how these older cards scale. Because again, these older cards aren't often being benchmarked with fresh data against the newer graphics cards all at once on like the most current drivers available and latest game updates and all of that. So that is really cool. And again, they didn't just do Witcher 3. There's a variety of other games. There's some synthetic benchmarks. And so I just think that this is worth checking out. Now, when looking at how the 4090 compares to the 5090, I think it's pretty clear that we're starting to see some CPUs. By mousing over this, I'm apparently absolutely destroying this thing because it keeps setting these two new percentage scalings. So watch out for that. But yeah, 483 versus 481 FPS looks like they're starting to get some CPU limitations. But I think other than that, you actually do start to see some scaling and stuff, and that's pretty interesting. So anyway, I think that's fun to play around with. I'll leave you that as your homework assignment. Check this article out. Again, you can translate it into English, and I hope all of you have an excellent day.